solid, good information you have, the greater you can carry out and execute God's will if you're in the ecclesia, or if, whatever your endeavors are. Obviously you need good information in order to do that, and I think that we accomplished that today. So let's give ourselves a hand. That's transpired today. I'm not going to be before you long. It has been a long day, and I want to conclude the matter on a good note and not put anybody to sleep. Today, I want to talk about security and emergency planning. When we were putting together this leadership conference, the executive board was discussing different topics of discussion to determine what were going to be some of the best subjects that were going to be quantifiable for our leaders. It's recorded? You press the red button? Thank you, sir. So we wanted to make sure that we talked about protocol, particularly things that had to do with the garments that we wear so the laity would understand. We wanted to talk about, Apostle did an excellent lesson on atonement, and some of the high feast days. We celebrate Easter and Christmas and Thanksgiving, but we don't think about Passover, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the memorial blowing of the trumpets, the Feast of Weeks. We don't even think about those days. And, God said that the Sabbath would always be with us and to, honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. But most African American, Pentecostal, Apostolic, Baptist, all of the different Zions that we belong to really don't keep those days. So we got an education on that today. Incidentally, all of the videos from today's session are going to be uploaded to YouTube, and they'll be made available also to everybody as well, particularly for our delegates that had other things to do today and arrived late and stuff like that. I want to make sure that they get the full function of their payment. So, June 17th, 2015, 21-year-old white supremacist walked into the oldest African Methodist Episcopal Church in the United States, in South Carolina, sat in Bible study, then stood up, walked to the front where someone was asking a question, and killed 9 people. And I would be willing to bet that if you ask those members and that pastor what, whether that could have happened in their church, if an incident like that could take place in their church, it is likely that they would have said, of course not. Ain't nobody coming up in here. This is the mother church. Everybody knows about this church. This church is hundreds of years old. And the history is rich for that place. That was Richard Allen's church. So it's amazing that those kinds of things can happen. And because of it, because we sometimes have a false sense of security, we don't use it. You know what I mean? The church is like a city, and I'm gonna try my best to stick to my notes because, as the bishop said, I don't want to border on loquacity tonight. The church is like a city that is secure. But like most secure places, once you're in, the assumption is that you belong there. And this is why the church is so susceptible to a lapse of security from within. The fact that a session like this even has to be facilitated sadly reflects our society and testifies that we live in a fallen world. People want to believe the places of worship are safe havens, right? Places to escape the troubles of the outside world, to pray and to worship, right? Worship in peace. However, history has shown that churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, and shrines have always suffered threats, attacks, and violence around the world. It's not even clear whether criminal incidents against faith-based organizations have increased over the years in America because not enough research or statistical record keeping has been done. Take, for instance, a burglary, where someone forces entry into a church. The FBI would most likely not classify that incident as a hate crime because any offenses against the church, you all know, is a hate crime. That's how the FBI classifies it. But they don't, because the motive for breaking in was probably the building's lack of security rather than its religious affiliation. Like the guy that went in, he didn't necessarily have anything about against AME churches. He just wanted to kill some black folk, right? Like everything else, there's been a learning curve over the last several decades, usually after tragic events have occurred. But today, such things as emergency evacuation plans, fire alarms, and sprinkler systems are commonplace for faith-based organizations and churches. But the trends in crime, the liability that can accompany running a church, the unavailability of emergency services that will respond quickly, and laws that have forced churches to put into place contingency plans that they thought they would never need have created a sense of urgency. So in fact, the Christian news website, I think it's onenewsnow.com, conducted an online poll after the shooting of this AME church where these 9 people were killed. The poll showed that over 80% of the responding churches indicated that they had no security or emergency plans in place. You know what that makes you, right?
Vulnerable.
A soft target. Right? He's a military man, so he knows what I'm talking about. Last year, in the speech to the State Department's Overseas Security Advisory Council in Washington, D.C., the former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said, for the first time, faith-based organizations are now one of the top 5 at-risk sectors in the world. Top 5, churches. Churches, let that sink in for a minute. So the government has recognized that, churches are at risk. However, the government's job is not to provide protection for churches any more than it is for them to provide protections for organizations or businesses. Religious leaders must be personally responsible to take measures that reduce risk and limit their own liability. Reduce risk. The first step in any plan, right? Most people ask, well, why should I worry about managing risk and taking emergency measures and safety plans? Well, one, because it's the ethical thing to do as a church, to not only protect those that come to worship with you, but to protect yourself as well, right? We can't ignore liability. And unfortunately, we live in a world where lawsuits are common and where negligence is one of the most frequently seen civil charges where damages are awarded. You all listening to me?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Where damages are awarded. All churches are subject to lawsuits for negligence and are usually just in court by the due diligence concept. Webster defines due diligence in civil litigation as the effort made by ordinarily prudent or reasonable people to avoid harm to another party or other people. Failure to make this effort may be considered negligence in court proceedings, even though it may not be. So if you fail to put up a sign on the bathroom door that all children under 12 have to be accompanied to the bathroom, and a child gets molested, your church can get sued and closed. Your 501c3 status can be taken. Monetary damages for negligent security and safeguarding of individuals have been judged against churches and faith-based organizations in the tens of millions of dollars. Ask the Church of God in Christ. Could you continue to operate if this happened to you? Do you have liability insurance? Raise your hand if you have liability insurance. Good. Many churches falsely believe that their liability insurance will cover them if they have a lawsuit. However, many are stored and floored when they learn either that they have the insurance company won't cover them, or that they don't have enough coverage. An insurance carrier could refuse to cover a lawsuit for two possible reasons. One, the cause of the damage was outside of the policy scope, or two, the court awarded punitive monetary damages, which are costs never covered by insurance policies, which sets an example for gross negligence. So it's vital that you consult with your insurance agent and underwriters to understand the extent of the coverage that you have. So make sure you get in writing what measures do not affect your policy. Because I saw everybody raise their hand regarding liability insurance. Another thing to consider to make sure that is that you're OSHA compliant. Many people, and the pastors don't think about OSHA. Okay? It also mandates 3 specific requirements for employers. If you got one person on the payroll at your church, you need to be OSHA compliant. First, you have to furnish a workplace that's free of hazard. I've been in some churches where there's, the roof is leaking, so the tiles have begun to get waterlogged, and they dipping. They got a little bubble. If that falls on somebody, even if they don't get hurt, but they say they hurt.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Got a witness.
Now you have a problem, right? A lot of you may think that doesn't apply to you, but some of you have these leaky roofs and tiles that are wet and can collapse, and a lot of things are going on in your churches that may not be of huge consideration to you now, but if OSHA comes in, and they can, and does an inspection because you have 2 people on the payroll,
Yep.
you could be levied some pretty heavy fines. Secondly, make sure you have the standards for workplace safety and health displayed for anybody that works here.
Placards.
Make sure you have the placards up. Third, maintain records of any employee injuries or any people that are attending the church. If somebody falls in the bathroom and says, "Oh, I'm fine," write it down. It's important that you keep record of it. If anybody gets sick after eating somebody's chicken at the church, make a report of it. It sounds funny, but it's not.
That's right.
Okay? Additionally, make sure you are protecting the children in your church by avoiding any risks to them. I told you all, Zion was sued by a 9-year-old boy's parents who was molested in the bathroom because he was allowed to go by himself. Now that organization demands all of its churches to post signs on the restroom doors that indicate a child can't be accompanied if he or she is under 12. This is just good information. The next step should be to perform a background check on everyone in a position of authority. Everybody. Security starts from within. Simple statement, right? Problem is, as church leaders, we're not compelled to ask people about their backgrounds because we don't want to run folk away or make them uncomfortable. But when a high-ranking staff member steals an offering of $680,000 from the church on a Sunday, like what happened at Joel Osteen's church, and then you realize the person had a storied past of embezzlement and robbery, you'll wish you had filled out the background form instead of a police report. That happened, okay? Conducting a proper background check is challenging, and guess what? It's expensive. It's not cheap. But you don't want to cut corners in this area. Be thorough and use discretion. Remember, even if you find a background that is unflattering, the person still deserves discretion and anonymity. Short of that, at a minimum, you should run the following checks for every staff member and volunteer. Number one, a criminal background search in every county they have lived in the past 7 years. Sounds like a lot, but I promise you, this is an investment that every church needs to make. And the number and check the sex offender registration in the current county and state that they live in. Because once you've been reported a sex offender, it sticks with you like luggage. Okay, and I'm telling you, you will be surprised who has the kindest spirit, great tithers, great dressers, doing well, but are fooling around with children. Okay, or may have had a rape conviction. This is tough talk, but it is a reality of the society that we live in. My brother, Reverend Brown, got a look on his face like something stinks. Because it does.
Yeah.
This stinks that as faith-based organizations, we have to have these kind of considerations. But the honest answer to that is when Elder Michelle was talking about who are the first responders and that it's the leaders, this is our responsibility. We must be concerned with love in our people, but we can't be concerned with feelings. I mean, no offense, but this is what we do here. To protect your children. You had a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old and a 7-year-old. We want to protect them. We want to make sure that the people that are running the youth ministry don't have a storied past. We don't think about this kind of stuff until it comes up. And then it has to be reactionary instead of preemptive. Y'all get that? The reason why you want to be thorough in this situation is because I read a newspaper article about a convicted sex offender working with children in the church. All because the church didn't know, ask, or run a complete background check. Okay? Next would be the formulation of a crisis management team. Now I know I didn't think of this until I began to study this. Most churches may not see the necessity for a team like this, but what happens if a fire occurs and it destroys half the church? These are all contingencies, but just think about it. Or if a main sewer line breaks in the church and it can't be entered because it's a health hazard. What about if a person with the organization is accused of embezzlement? What if I use a group from your church is involved in a serious vehicle accident while traveling on the church bus? What if the church is sued with serious allegations that are made public? Should the pastor be the one scrambling around trying to gather people up to help him or her in the middle of the night deal with any of these real events that could transpire at any church? Or should they be a group of people who are already set aside that share some level of expertise in the area that could be able to speak to these situations and react properly? What if R. Kelly attended your church and you got a 150-member youth ministry? First thing on people's mind is that they're going to be thinking, well, wait a minute, what was it? He took them to the studio 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Took my 2 daughters.
Mm-hmm.
Took Joe's 2 daughters. And he let them ride in the limousine with him. Who responds to that? Right? These are the types of teams that should be assembled in advance and be ready to respond. They should know in advance where to meet in the event of an emergency, how everybody is to be contacted, who will be a media spokesperson, who will be a liaison for officials from police, fire in the city or other law enforcement agencies, a secondary meeting place if your church is uninhabitable. If someone dies in the church, that can happen. Somebody go in the bathroom, have a seat, and don't get up. All of these incidents are real incidents that can happen on any given Sunday or during any Bible study or function at the church, and it is better to be prepared than not to be prepared. You all get that?
Yes, sir.
One of the most ignored missions of every church is securing the temple. Securing the temple. In addition to securing the temple, securing the angel of the house and that individual's family. When we think of security, we often think of how it's layered. Is there an alarm? What kind of access is allowed? Some churches, when they're building facilities from the ground up, consider things like proper lighting that deters vandalism or assaults against staff, or having shrubs strategically placed on your landscaping because it forms this psychological barrier that tells intruders to keep away until the fence is up. Right? All of those can be done by consulting a proper security company. However, what most churches list as one of the things that they don't do, and what has come to prominence lately due to the violence against churches, is protecting the parishioners and the pastor. We just don't do it. I remember when I was a member of Life Center Church. Bishop Phillips can attest to this because he was there as well. T.L. Barrett, when he would come down, he would always come down. He used to go to the back door and greet people, but the security told him to stop doing that. He said, come out of the pulpit, stand right in front, and let people come to you. And there were always 4 people around him. And it was more, listen to this, it was more, and my prayer warriors will know about this, it was more than just the danger of a guy coming up and doing something. Sometimes it was a scantily clad woman coming up and pressing herself up against the pastor a little bit too long.
Yes, sir.
These kinds of things happen. Ushering is so important because here, the usher stops a woman in a mini dress or a dress that's a little bit above her knees and she ain't got no scarf. But if she comes and sits on the front row and crosses her leg and all that thigh is showing, let's be real, it can be a distraction. To even a man that's been married for 30 years, faithful, never had a problem. The reality is that these things can transpire in our churches, and there are spirits walking in the church, and everybody don't have an intercessory prayer team. Security is a line of defense. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Make sure that your security staff is assisting the ushers and covering the doors, that a security person always accompanies the deacons wherever the collection plate goes to be counted. Right?
Say it again.
Yeah, that a security person always accompanies the deacons wherever the collection plate goes to be counted. That someone arrives at the church before the pastor and his or her family to make sure that they are properly escorted in and out of the church. To make sure that someone does an assessment of the property surrounding the church to make sure that nothing has been laid that could be harmful to not only the pastor but the people. Get there early and walk around the church. These assessments can be made as individual needs require. The next measure for your consideration is emergency measures. Emergency measures. Most churches are polar opposites in their approach in this area because they either have no emergency plan at all, or they've overdeveloped the emergency plan. And this usually happens in big ministry. They got all kinds of stuff in place. They don't even make no sense. They don't even need it. But to keep things simple, there's just a few areas that every church should consider. Number one, a lot of us have small churches, and what would you do if the front door of your church caught on fire? Or if you were in the lower level of your church and upstairs caught on fire and there was no way out? Having a proper emergency evacuation plan, or it's not always an evacuation plan, but knowing how to avoid smoke inhalation and do your best to survive until help comes. People panic. And what do people do when they panic? They hyperventilate. What happens when you hyperventilate? You're taking deep breaths of smoke and you're going to black out before you know it. But if you know what to do, get low and short, quick breaths. Your cell phone works in the smoke.
That's on my head.
You call the fire department, we are downstairs, we are trapped. They will break their necks getting to you. That's why I got love for firemen. Okay? Evacuation planning is important. Having a shelter in place plan. That's what they call it. A shelter in place plan is definitely something that most churches in the city of Chicago don't think that they'll ever need. But while growing up in Inglewood, I remember there being an active shooter situation a block away from my home on 66 and Hermitage. And we were playing outside across the street in A.R. League's church. Okay? Playing strikeout in the parking lot. And when that shooting started, the pastor's daughter, who was like 15 years older than us, came out because there was a 2-flat attached to the back of the church. That's where they lived. She came out and she said, "Y'all get in here." It's like 8 of us. We all ran in the church because the church is the safe haven. What about with what happened with this drop in weather? What if the city came to you and asked you, "Hey, can you be a haven for the homeless tonight?" It's 20 degrees below zero. And with the wind chill, it's 50 degrees below zero. Y'all remember that? Those 2 nights? It was a Wednesday and a Thursday, I think.
Yeah.
Y'all remember that?
30 and 35.
Furthermore, can you imagine being outside in that weather? Safe haven, man. Safe haven, right? So there's a few more things to know. I have a list of resources to help you get started with this process. Those that are interested, you all can see me afterwards. You can give me your email address and I'll get them to you. In particular, there's a list of 12 agencies that every pastor should be in possession of. And if you handle security for your church, okay, it's mostly pastors in here, this is a list that you should have as well, okay? Are there any questions? Told y'all that was gonna be quick. Yes, sir.
My deacons don't handle money. Trustees do. So here's the question is, you shouldn't touch money. Question is, what should be a procedure for them taking the money out of the church? And I asked that question because for 10 years now, I've said that we need a safe in the church. Because I think that the money should stay in the church overnight. Because nobody knows, everybody thinks the money's gone on Sunday. So one, I'm the last person in the church, nobody hit me up. So, but for 10 years we've not had that. What is a safe procedure?
There is this really cool word called oversight. Whatever your plan is, you work that out for your ministry based on who you have helping you in that area of endeavor. So it may be for everybody to see the trustees walk into the back room to count the money and then somehow get it to your wife and nobody knows she has it. Or it could be.
We never getting anywhere, I'm just saying. They think I have it because I'm the last one in church.
Right. Or maybe a safe investment would be to get a strong box, not a lock box. No, a strong
That you
box.
go to the floor.
Yeah. Okay. Get a strong box because they're less expensive than a safe. A cheap, good safe is $700. Okay? So, whatever your methodology is, some people, right during service, send the person out with the bag, tell them to put it in the drop box at the bank. Go out the back door, go on and take this, and then you see that deacon come in like 25 minutes later, he coming from the bank. walking up to the front, right? You're like, where he been? Right? He been to the bank. Trustee been to the bank to drop it off. So there's never, here listen, I am a firm believer in the pastor should do two things, and we were just discussing it at this table. Preach the word, cast the vision. Anybody that is attending a church or is a member of a church should be assisting the pastor in casting the vision. The pastor, the leader, the angel of the house is a delegator. Apostle Robinson made a good point on one of our executive calls while in the planning process of this event. He said, why is Bishop Harrington making phone calls about food? Make sure that the food is here. Why is Bishop Harrington getting the bags and the notebooks and the pens? So now, let's look at this transversely. Go to St. John Mary of Scots Church in Gooseneck, Wisconsin. A Catholic church with 200 members, let's say, where there is not only a pastor in that house, but that pastor just happens to be a bishop. Do you think that those parishioners would allow the bishop of that house to carry out those kinds of duties with everyone else around him? I mean, really, would that happen? So there's a level that we have to get to. And listen, we're not here to eat anybody's lunch. Yeah, this is not a criticism. It's an observation. It's an observation to make us tighten things up. Listen, I am a firm believer in the remnant. I believe in the remnant. When I read the scripture here, listen, 3 words shook me to my core. Narrow is the gate. Everybody ain't gonna make it in. Everybody is not gonna make it in. Everybody can't be a part of New Century.
That's true.
Everybody can't be a member of Spirit Redeemed.
Amen.
Everybody can't be a member of Mercy Seat. Right? Everybody can't be a member of New Eclipse. Sweet Holy Spirit, Daytona Beach. Right? Certainly not Resurrection in Toledo, Ohio, right? We have to realize, what's that scripture? Somebody give it to me where it says, like they really weren't with us, because if they were with us, they would, come on, somebody, I know one of y'all know it.
If they were with us,
because if they were with us, they would have stayed with us.
1 John, bruh, talking about the 380.
Yeah, so, listen, we were talking about this earlier. T.D. Jakes had this excellent locution that I love. He said, the gift of goodbye,
yes, Lord,
is the 11th commandment and the 10th spiritual gift. Now, all y'all should know that there's only 10 commandments and 9 spiritual gifts. He said the gift of goodbye is the 11th commandment and the 10th spiritual gift.
1 John 2.
Right? Read that scripture for us, Bishop.
Little children, it is the last time.
Whew.
And as you have heard, that Antichrist shall come. Even now are there many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. They went out from us.
Stop. We know that there are antichrists
Right.
in the house.
Yes.
We know they're here.
Yeah.
But they went out from us. You know why? Because they couldn't stand to stay.
They were not of us.
Because when the word is truly going forth,
Yes, sir.
They can't take
no demons stay in the
Burns them
house.
up. Right. They catch on fire.
Listen, they can't stand it. They be looking at you and say, is it hot in here?
No, it's just you.
Is it hot in here? Right? They can't stand to stay. But, and you know, there's this thing on Instagram, it's a page called Praise Break. And all they show is,
Yeah.
they be playing with God. I despise that. We laughing, but I hate it. I hate that. Because it gives the wrong impression to the people of God that are coming through that door, and you don't even see them because you're playing, and they broken. They dying inside, and they're looking for us to be the example. They see all these people going into the building. Building meant to hold 300, there's 450 in there. They in there like sardines, so the impression is, well, man, that's a church. The word of God has to be going forth in there. But then they go in, and listen, I'm going to just say it and I ain't going to take it back. They go in and they see men on the praise team with halter tops and blouses on. They see people playing with God instead of having a respect for the house that they. Here, listen. If the name for this house, if the proper colloquialism is that this is the house of God. Can you imagine in 2000 BC walking into a temple that Solomon built? No, you couldn't imagine that. You know why? Because you're not a priest who only on the Day of Atonement walks into the Holy of Holies. This is the Holy of Holies. Every church is built this way. It's behind the altar. This is the Holy of Holies. The priest prepared for 7 days before they went to the Holy of Holies to sprinkle blood on the mercy seat. You know why? Because if they weren't clean, they could die. If they were unclean, they could die. So they quarantined themselves. And you know how they cleaned themselves? With ashes. Ashes? Don't they make you dirty? They used ashes. I dare you to go and read why. I double dare you. If we don't have respect for the house, they won't have respect for the house, meaning the people. And if the people don't have respect for the house, then how will you ever be able to cast a vision properly? Everything you do, you try to find somebody to be on the intercessory prayer team, it won't happen. Because the people that are qualified and have a desire to do it won't. Man, I don't know about this. Man, I seen everybody coming here. I see it on Facebook all the time. I thought this, man, I'm not, You know what? Man, when they call for the offering, I'm going to walk around. I ain't going to give now. I'm going to just walk right on out. I belonged to a church for a season where people would join on the first Sunday and you would never see him again. Because the pastor played too much. He was a comedian in real life. What's it, the Miller Comedy Challenge? Y'all remember that? Some of you may remember that. It's this the Miller Beer Company used to do this comedy challenge, and the particular year that he entered that, he was beat out by one guy. Said the entertainer. So he really was funny, but then he took that into the pulpit. In the last 10 years, he's been asked to leave 3 churches that he was pastoring.
Wow.
Because he still hasn't grasped the brevity of the calling. It ain't that, listen, let me tell you something. People generally don't enter ministry unless they really have taken some kind of serious consideration. Now, they may get polluted in the process. Man, I can make money at this. The filthy lucre thing comes into existence and preeminence in their mind. But listen, I'm rampant. Listen, if we don't do better, God will do worse. Say he's good and what?
Terrible.
Terrible. Yes,
I have a security question. The issue that I have is during service, and you've been in my church, one of my associates said I should lock the door after a certain point of the morning so that nobody else can walk in during service that could come in and do something to the people at the church or come in and shoot us up. And I have a hard problem with that because I don't want to ever lock the front doors to prevent people that may come in late, come in at the last minute or God sends me there, and then my doors are locked. So I have a dilemma. So the only thing go ahead. I'll sit back.
Let me answer that question for you.
I was gonna tell them in our church, we have armed security,
Okay.
bottom line.
The way that I was going to answer it, the same way. Listen, you military man. Did they ever lock the bases? You ever seen a locked military base at the gate?
No, they have security at the gate.
What do they have at the gate?
Security.
Sentries. Not security. Sentries.
And they're armed. With live.
Sentry is armed. That's a military man too.
Yeah.
He armed me though. Sentries.
Well, I do have a couple of men that have concealed carry permits, and they asked me permission to bring them to church on Sunday, and I told them yes.
Okay.
At least I know that there are gentlemen there that are armed if necessary.
If you're going to have,
Can I
address that?
yes, let me just say this. If you're going to have armed security in your house,
They need to be trained.
yeah, not only, my assumption is that if they have a concealed carry license, they went through some training, but they need to be trained by you
Yeah,
Right.
that's
on
what
what is expected of them,
That's what
that it needs to be concealed, because most people that have a concealed carry license like to show
Yeah.
that they have a weapon on them. Bishop, what were you gonna say?
Two things. One to the locked door incident, and we had a similar situation here with that same incident. One, you need to know what the code is in your respective city and state, because one, it's against the law to lock doors when you have a certain amount of people
It's a
in a
fire.
public
Okay.
facility. And if
Okay.
you don't have slap guards
I
on
didn't
your
think about
door, city in most places will fine you if you do a locked door situation like
Okay.
that. Second thing is with concealed carry, we have to really understand the fine print of what concealed carry really is. Concealed carry get a lot of people in trouble because they don't know the law. I have a brother who's a private investigator, so he's legally able to carry. I have 2 Cook County sheriffs and 1 police officer in the church. But even with their office or duties outside of the county and the city, it does not cover them in the church.
Oh.
I had to add them if we're gonna utilize them as a tool, I had to add them to our insurance as a liability. And so just because people have concealed carry, most people don't know you get in more trouble for shooting people
Yeah, you do.
with a concealed carry
Yeah, you do.
than you are if you are a criminal with a gun.
And I just thought of something.
I didn't know that.
Even though you have concealed carry, doesn't mean that you can do security.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because you have to have a perk card
Absolutely.
to do security. There's an FOID card, and it's a professional something regulation. Yeah,
Yeah,
you have to have that, and it's you have to have a minimum. You have to have 40 hours for unarmed, and like 300 hours for armed. So you can't just
That's why I brought it up.
You know, and that's so interesting. In Florida, you know how they get around that? Stand your ground.
Stand your ground.
Yep.
That's the law in Florida, stand your ground. So they get around it that way. Now, they have to be included on the insurance for those obvious purposes of liability. But if an individual came into a church and there's an armed guard or an armed personnel with a conceal and carry, and that individual presented themselves as a threat with a weapon, if that security person, you know, exercise his right of
Stand your ground.
stand your ground, it's not a problem. It's not a problem.
Yeah, and you
Now,
just-
all states don't have that.
Sure.
Illinois shows don't have
Because
it.
you know, in
Yeah.
some places, if you go into a public facility, whether it's church or wherever it may be, and there's that icon of a gun on the door,
Right.
and you walk in as a concealed carry, you're in violation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it varies from
Yeah.
city to city, state to state. You gotta know what the law is in your very city.
But they
very
just
city.
have, if I'm not mistaken now, I think the Supreme Court ruled on that, because it was a case, I believe, that was brought before the Supreme Court that would allow, maybe in some states, that would allow people who had concealed and carry permits to carry a weapon in church. That was one of the places.